Look at this document. It is an issue of the American Weekly Mercury, printed in Philadelphia. The date at the top sets our exact timeline, the week of February 14th to the 21st, 1721. The early 18th century Atlantic was a notoriously volatile system. Empires collided, markets swung violently. Without accurate information, merchants navigated blind. Raw intelligence was their only defense against sudden ruin. The dispatches printed on these pages arrived as breaking reports, data packets flowing from The Hague, Paris, and the Caribbean directly to the Philadelphia docks. First, the escalating tensions of a maritime trade war brewing in the Pacific. Second, the catastrophic collapse of a European superpower's domestic currency, wiping out financial trust overnight. And finally, severe political upheaval and social friction happening right in their own colonial backyard. To understand the actual geopolitical reality of 1721, we have to look past modern summaries. We need to read the raw intelligence directly and decode the precise anxieties printed on the page. This dispatch arrived from The Hague, dated September 20. The Dutch state outlines extreme economic dependence on the East India trade, calling it the darling of this country and is the chief branch of our whole commerce and wealth. A newly formed French East India Company is encroaching on Dutch monopolies, specifically targeting the Philippines, Giholo, and the Ternate Islands. In response, local merchants are eager to be allowed to fit out ships of war from Batavia to defend their market share. Fortified outposts like Ternate functioned as critical nodes in a spice trade that was as lucrative as it was contested. The ships they prepared to deploy from Batavia represented the apex of naval engineering, capable of locking down entire oceanic supply lines through overwhelming force. Why would a merchant in Pennsylvania care about a naval skirmish over clothes in the Pacific Ocean? Because the Atlantic Empire was tightly wound, a violent disruption in Dutch and French Pacific supply chains immediately threatened marine insurance rates, credit lines, and the availability of imported goods on the docks of Philadelphia. Directly next to the threat of trade war, the paper shifts to a domestic crisis. This dispatch from Paris, dated September 26th, reports on a financial collapse, beginning with a blunt admission: our want of money continues, or rather increases. The French crown attempted to manipulate their physical silver. The dispatch describes a newly minted crown piece as a kind of a new monster that is very little bigger than an English shilling, carrying a fraction of its intended weight. This aggressive devaluation shattered public trust in paper money. The report notes that paper bank bills are trading at an extravagant discount, viz. From 36 to 50%. This chart visualizes the mechanical severity of that failure. If you hold French debt or trade in French notes, your purchasing power has evaporated by up to 50%, nearly overnight. The result of this policy was acute social panic. Physical mobs formed in Paris streets as citizens desperately tried to unload worthless paper currency. For the colonial merchant reading this paper, this is a material warning. When a global superpower defaults on its fiat currency, the ensuing shockwaves dictate international exchange rates. It makes the credit networks that colonial import and export businesses rely on incredibly fragile. Now we turn to the second page. The intelligence moves closer to home, arriving via New York with a focus on the Caribbean. Here we see evidence of deep administrative instability, as the report notes a mighty change of officers. The text lays out a sweeping, involuntary turnover of power. Mr. Cox is abruptly appointed president by royal commission, and the former leader, Colonel Fryer, is ordered home. Barbados was a massively wealthy sugar-producing hub. It anchored the southern end of the colonial trade network. Whoever controlled its administration controlled significant economic throughput. These firings were mandated directly from London. For colonial leaders, it demonstrated how quickly local authority could be dismantled from an ocean away. Colonial political stability was an illusion. A single ship docking with new orders could instantly decapitate established leadership, forcing merchants to constantly renegotiate their allegiances. Finally, we reach the local intelligence, Philadelphia, February 21st. The lead story is the arrival of William Burnett, the governor of New York, accompanied by several gentlemen of that colony. Notice the intense, obligatory political worship required in the printing. The text validates Burnet's authority by explicitly connecting him to a worthy prelate and sacred majesty King George himself. But immediately below this display of absolute royal deference, the very next paragraph drops into the gritty reality of the colonial underbelly. The paper publishes intelligence tracking convict malefactors. These transported British criminals are actively tracked. The report notes they arrived in Maryland, passed through Philadelphia, and intend to travel onward to Boston. This functions as a public warning system, mapping a continuous corridor of transient criminal movement directly through the major economic centers of the American seaboard. Thousands were forcibly shipped across the Atlantic to avoid execution, creating a massive influx of marginalized people deeply embedded within the colonial labor force. In just a few inches of type, you see the extreme social stratification of 1721. A royal governor draped in sacred authority shares the exact same column space as exiled felons moving silently between cities. When we step back and view this single newspaper issue as a complete artifact, a specific model of the 18th century emerges. Within a few densely printed pages, we have tracked data flowing from Southeast Asian spice islands to the streets of Paris, through Caribbean sugar hubs, and straight into Pennsylvania. The external pressures are immense. The immediate threat of naval violence in Batavia over trade monopolies, paired with the cascading effects of a total fiat currency collapse in France. The internal pressures are equally sharp. Sudden political decapitations in Barbados keep local leaders perpetually insecure, while an underclass of exiled convicts filters through the local ports. Every event recorded here functioned as a variable in a tightly coupled Atlantic system, where a disruption in one node sent immediate ripples across the map. This is why historians rely on primary documents. Textbooks smooth out the friction of the past, but the primary source preserves the actual, localized panic of the moment. By reading the exact words and tracking the specific anxieties printed in February 1721, we strip away modern assumptions. We are left with a rigorous, unvarnished look at how colonial subjects actually navigated a highly dangerous, rapidly shifting global network.
The Daily Dispatch, history in print. No modern gloss, no modern hint, just black and white.